Welcome to the Inspired Podcast. Have you ever wondered, really wondered, what if everything you've been taught about money is just plain wrong?
Yeah, it's a pretty unsettling thought, right? Well, Robert Kiyosaki is back, and he's definitely stirring things up again with his new book, Capitalist Manifesto.
This is coming, almost 25 years after Rich Dad, Poor Dad hit the shelves and really shook things up.
Yeah, it's been a while, and he's not holding back in this new one either.
Yeah.
If you followed Kiyosaki's work over the years, you know he's always been that voice, urging us to challenge the status quo, to think differently, even about something as fundamental as saving money.
Especially when, as he argues, governments seem to be printing money like it's going out of style.
Exactly. So that's where this deep dive comes in. We really wanted to break down the key ideas Kiyosaki presents in Capitalist Manifesto. It's a book that's already sparking a lot of debate. It's been called everything from political and divisive to truly eye-opening.
And that's what we aim to do, right? Pull out the most insightful, thought-provoking stuff that our listeners can really sink their teeth into.
Absolutely.
So just to be clear, this isn't just a rehashing of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is it?
Definitely not. It builds upon those core Rich Dad principles, for sure. But it really expands the scope to look at capitalism as a whole and what it actually means to achieve true financial freedom in a world that's constantly changing. Kiyosaki actually uses a lot of historical references and quotes to support his points too, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. I also notice he shares a lot more personal stories in this one, right? Like from his time in the Marines and his own journey as an entrepreneur.
It's not just random storytelling either. The way he weaves those anecdotes in, it really brings the financial lessons he's talking about to life.
It sounds like this is going to resonate really strongly with anyone who's been following his work, especially his more recent stuff and online content.
For sure. But, even if you've only read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, this book is definitely worth checking out. It might feel a bit more challenging at first just because it covers so much ground.
But I get the sense it's one of those books that really rewards you the more you engage with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And hey, that's what we're here for. We'll help guide you through some of the most interesting and potentially valuable parts.
Sounds good. Let's jump right in. One of the first big ideas Kiyosaki presents is what he calls the 3 sides to a coin principle.
Yeah, that one really grabbed my attention. In a world where everyone seems so focused on being right, Kiyosaki kind of flips the script. He says there's huge value in learning to see things from multiple perspectives. Think about an actual coin.
Okay, got it.
You get heads, tails.
Yeah.
But then he points out there's also the edge.
Oh, the edge. You don't usually think about that part.
Right. And that's his point. He equates that edge perspective with intelligence. He argues that you only truly start to understand something when you make the effort to seek out and listen to viewpoints that are different from your own, even if you totally disagree with them. It's about stepping outside your own little bubble, your own fixed way of seeing things.
It's like expanding your awareness.
Exactly.
So how does this idea of seeing all sides of the coin connect with his famous cash flow quadrant, the ESBI?
Oh, that's a great question. It ties in directly, just to remind everyone that's employee, self-employed, business owner, investor, right?
Right.
So Kiyosaki's point is that when you develop this edge perspective, you can actually make a conscious choice about where you want to be within that quadrant. He argues you don't have to just accept being stuck in the employee, the E quadrant, or even the self-employed S quadrant, which he sometimes calls being a brain slave, to kind of highlight the idea that in those quadrants, you're mostly trading your time for money. You're working for someone else's system.
Right.
But instead, you can choose to move toward the business owner or the investor quadrants. That's the B and the I, where you start to create your own system, and that's where he sees true financial freedom and control.
So this 3 sides to a coin principle is about more than just understanding different financial strategies. It's about adopting a whole new mindset.
Exactly. Kiyosaki encourages us to apply this multifaceted thinking to all aspects of our lives. Don't just assume you're 100% right all the time. Be curious. Gather information from different sources. Then you can make much more informed decisions. He actually defines intelligence in this context, not just as knowing a lot of stuff, but as the ability to see multiple perspectives, to really gather information, and then, crucially, to act on it.
That's powerful. Makes a lot of sense. Now, Kiyosaki also delves into some pretty complex topics in the book, like this whole idea of the shadow banking system, which sounds kind of ominous.
It is. He's really emphasizing that there are these massive financial forces at work in the world that most people are completely oblivious to. And he definitely knows what he's talking about when it comes to macroeconomics. He's urging us to pay attention to these big picture shifts happening in the global financial landscape.
And this shadow banking system is one of those hidden forces.
It's a big one. He describes it as a part of the financial system that operates largely outside of government regulation. And it's huge, like estimated to be about 30% of the entire financial system.
Wow, that's massive. So what exactly is it? Like, what kinds of things happen in this shadow banking world?
Think things like repo markets, which are basically short-term loans where parties use securities as collateral. The problem is, because these transactions happen on such a large scale, if those loans start to go bad, it can create huge instability. Kiyosaki actually argues that this system, with things like these repo markets, plays a major role in those boom and bust cycles we see in the economy. He points to the 2008 market crash as a prime example.
So it's like this whole other financial universe running in parallel with the one we're familiar with, and it can have these huge ripple effects on everyone.
Exactly. And what really worries him, and he states this pretty clearly in the book, is that this shadow banking system has gotten even bigger and more potentially dangerous since the 2008 crisis. He uses this really vivid image, calling it a King Kong of a Frankenstein monster, which kind of gives you a sense of...
Yeah, the scale of it. So what can we do about it as individuals? It's not like we can just dismantle this whole shadow system, right?
Well, that's the key question, right? And Kiyosaki acknowledges that. You can't directly control these massive global financial forces. But what you can do, what he strongly encourages us to do, is to be aware of them, to understand how they can potentially impact us. This awareness allows you to be more strategic with your personal finances, with your investments, and potentially even capitalize on opportunities that come up during times of economic turmoil.
That's a good point. So even though it can feel a little overwhelming to think about these massive forces, it's better to be informed and prepared than caught totally off guard. Okay, so shifting gears a bit now, Kiyosaki is a huge advocate for financial education. And he talks a lot about teaching these principles, like capitalism at home. Why is that so important to him?
Well, he considers himself a financial educator, first and foremost. He even created the Cash Flow board game back in 1996 as a way to teach people about money and investing and the principles of capitalism in a fun and engaging way.
Oh, I remember that game. It's kind of like Monopoly on steroids.
Well, you could say that.
Yeah.
It's much more sophisticated than Monopoly. And it was designed specifically to bring those rich dad concepts to life. The whole idea of escaping the rat race, that constant struggle to make ends meet and finding a path to financial freedom through smart decision-making and strategic investing. The game actually teaches you about assets, liabilities, cash flow. These are the building blocks of financial literacy in a way that's much more interactive than reading a textbook.
Yeah, and it gets the whole family involved, which is great. So his argument is that schools aren't really teaching people what they need to know about money to actually become financially successful, to break free from that rat race.
Yeah, he believes strongly that we need to boost what he calls our financial IQ, our FIQ, and that education has to happen outside of the traditional school system, like understanding how passive income works, how to read a financial statement. These are crucial skills for building wealth, but most people never learn them in school.
And it's interesting because when he talks about teaching capitalism at home, he doesn't mean turning it into some rigid, boring curriculum.
No, not at all. It can be as simple as playing games like Monopoly or Cash Flow, of course. It can be sharing stories about successful entrepreneurs, people who've built businesses or made smart investments. He actually has a whole section in Capitalist Manifesto with interviews and real-world examples, which is really cool.
Oh, cool. I'll have to check that out. I also got a sense from the book that Kiyosaki isn't just talking about money and investments. There's a broader, almost a warning about the future and the importance of understanding capitalism.
You're definitely right. He frames capitalism not just as a way to make money, but as a crucial foundation for individual freedom and a way to potentially avoid some pretty dire consequences if capitalist principles are abandoned. And for Kiyosaki, financial education is the key to navigating this landscape successfully.
And this is where his own life experiences come into play, right? He talks a lot about his time at the Merchant Marine Academy and what he saw in Vietnam. It seems like those experiences had a really profound impact on him.
Absolutely. They really shaped his worldview. At the academy, he was reading Marx, Hitler, Mao. Then in Vietnam, he saw the realities of communism firsthand. And later, back in the US, he saw the anti-war protests, which he interprets through this Marxist lens as well. So all these experiences really solidified his belief that non-capitalist systems ultimately lead to some pretty dangerous outcomes.
And he even draws connections, which might be controversial to some, between those historical ideologies and things we're seeing in education today, like critical race theory.
Yes, he does. He expresses concern that what he sees as Marxist-influenced ideas are seeping into the education system, not just through things like critical race theory, but also in discussions about gender identity and what he calls postmodernist education. And his response to this is to encourage people to really push back against these ideas by actively teaching the principles of capitalism at home within their families.
He also talks about something he calls the freedom of truth. What does he mean by that?
He really stresses the importance of understanding how key institutions work. Specifically, he points to the NEA, that's the National Education Association, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, and of course the FED, the Federal Reserve. He argues that if you want to protect your financial freedom, you need to really understand how these entities operate. And he doesn't just leave us hanging. He actually offers some concrete steps that individuals and families can take to become more informed and financially resilient.
It sounds like he covers a lot of ground in this book, some pretty complex stuff. But the way you're describing it, the writing style itself seems pretty straightforward.
It is. That's one of the things I really appreciate about Kiyosaki's writing. He's able to explain these complex ideas in a way that most people can grasp. And it's the kind of book that you might find yourself rereading, picking up new insights each time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Although I did see some reviews mentioning that the book has some grammatical errors and some repetitive sections.
Yeah, a few people have pointed those things out. But even those who mentioned those issues still seem to have found a lot of value in the book's content.
And Kiyosaki's still a huge advocate for owning tangible assets, right? Real estate, gold, and increasingly Bitcoin.
Absolutely. That's still a core part of his philosophy. He sees these kinds of assets as a way to opt out of what he views as a system that's rigged against the average person, a system where governments can devalue your money through inflation and debt. He advocates for using what he calls good debt, borrowing money strategically to acquire assets that can actually generate income for you. And he's always stressing the importance of self-education when it comes to finances.
And he's not afraid to make some pretty bold predictions about potential economic upheaval, is he?
Definitely not. He warns about the potential for hyperinflation, major stock market corrections, and even problems with things like traditional pensions. His advice is all about taking steps to prepare for these possibilities. Things like building up a cash reserve, diversifying your investments both across different asset classes and geographically, and networking with other people who share your commitment to financial resilience.
It's fascinating to see him starting to talk about the potential impact of AI on all of this.
Yeah, that's a really interesting addition. He sees AI as a potential tool that can be used to amplify those core financial principles he's been talking about for years. Like, AI can potentially help you automate certain investment strategies or optimize your taxes. But he also cautions that individuals need to stay in control of their own AI tools, not just become reliant on algorithms controlled by big financial institutions.
So if you had to boil it all down, what would you say is the central message Kiyosaki is trying to convey in Capitalist Manifesto?
I think it's all about taking ownership of your financial future. It's about being willing to question those conventional financial rules we've all been taught, committing to lifelong learning when it comes to finances, understanding how the economic system works, leveraging debt wisely, and preparing for potential economic uncertainty.
And it's worth noting that back in January 2024, Kiyosaki publicly stated that he was over $1 billion in debt. Some people have pointed to that as a bit of a contradiction, given his financial advice.
It's definitely something to think about. It adds another layer of complexity to his perspective.
So in an era of AI billionaires and crypto chaos, Kiyosaki's manifesto isn't just a playbook, it's a survival guide. Remember, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time, well, after listening to this episode.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you for listening to the Inspired Podcast.